welcome to The Dialogue, our new series of video podcasts from the Think ESG table, where we gather and share the voices of change makers who use business as a force for good. Our guest for today's episode is Abhishek Gupta, Investment Director and Head of Caspian Impact Investments. Caspian invests equity and debt capital in socially responsible, multiple bottom line businesses that address the problems of access and efficiency in business ecosystems that have a positive social or environmental impact. They have a track record of making investments and supporting some of the best known social impact enterprises. As one of the early entrants and leaders in the impact investing space in India, they're also one of the very few fund managers with a proven exit track record. As for Abhishek, he leads the debt business through which Caspian makes debt investments across a wide variety of sectors, including food and agribusiness, financial inclusion, clean energy, healthcare, and education, among others. Welcome, Abhishek. I'm glad to have you on our show.
So, thank you so much, Surya. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. You hold a degree in dairy technology, and now you're working in a sector as niche as financing social enterprises. Can you tell us more about your journey and what is it that really attracted you to the sector?
Sure. I guess dairy technology is in itself a fairly niche sector. I mean, for a long time, people used to ask me, what do they teach you? Do they teach you how to milk cows? I guess people don't realize when they have ice cream, or for example, when they get that pouch of milk in the morning, or even baby food, there's a dairy technologist somewhere making that or helping make that. So it in itself is quite a niche compared to, when you say IT or any other type of engineering or technology. What happened as a part of the while I was going through the dairy technology course was it gave me an exposure to a variety of subjects. I mean, we did everything from biotechnology to engineering to even economics during the course. It gave me a fair bit of an exposure to rural India as well. And I did write the MBA entrance examinations, and IRMA was one college that I mean, somebody told me about it when I was in school, and I was told that it's a very difficult place to get into. And I realized that it had a course which was fairly, it was like my dairy technology course. It had different aspects to it. So I wrote IRMA. I got into IRMA, which is the Institute of Rural Management, Anand, and studied there. I got, from the campus, I got placed into this organization called IFMR Trust. Now it is called Dwara Trust back then, which is again a financial services organization which has incubated a number of companies that work in the social and finance or investing sector, both the operations models and investing models. So that's how it started. But over the years, I have essentially, if you look at my career, I've focused on providing or building kind of new businesses from scratch on enabling access to finance for SMEs or businesses that are typically not funded by the traditional business channels. So at the IFMR group, I helped initially start. I started building up a dairy supply chain company and the financing around it, wherein we were helping financial institutions get access to technology and manpower that could enable them to make loans to dairy farmers back then. Then I helped in setting up a structured finance. So I actually changed groups within the change firms within the group, and I helped in setting up a structured finance vertical that was targeted at providing access to capital markets for small financial institutions that did MSME finance and affordable housing finance. And after that, I joined Caspian about seven and a half years ago and essentially helped in growing the debt business at Caspian. Caspian historically used to be a equity firm, but I joined because of my debt or structured debt experience to help build a portfolio of loans that we make to companies that work towards both positive social and environmental impact. And that's what we've been doing. Over the last 7 years, we've funded about 160 companies across a variety of sectors, which include food and agri, clean energy, healthcare, education, financial inclusion, and so on. Basically, all professionally managed companies. Uh, and we provided funding to the tune of, I think, a little more than 2,000 crores or about 2,500 crores till date. And I joined as I think the second or third person in the team, but since then the team has grown. Now we are a 65 people team now, and we have operations across three locations: Hyderabad, Bangalore, and Delhi. Those are the places where our offices are, but we always had pan-India lending operations. So our clients are all across the country. Uh, and I have essentially been involved in help, from initially sourcing, evaluating, and onboarding customers to slowly building up the team across, all the verticals. So been a fair bit of a learning for me also to build up this kind of business from scratch, which actually isn't very common in that sense. And so that's been my journey, Surya.
Yeah, very interesting journey there. So, for the sake of our viewers, you did explain much about Caspian, but how does Caspian Debt really compare itself against a traditional bank or an NBFC or a venture capitalist? And what kind of equity and debt products do you have on offer?
Sure. Yeah. So the if you so I think the good thing that has happened in the last 10, 15 years is that entrepreneurship has become a viable career option for, normal Indians. I mean, earlier, if you would want to take up entrepreneurship, people would generally ask you, your family would ask you, ki, whether, naukri nahi mili kya? Is it that you didn't get a job? So I think that has changed. Now, because of that, what has happened is over the years, several first generation entrepreneurs have come up, building businesses that meet the needs or, are solving for problems that, social or are social or environmental in nature. Now, the issue with most of these businesses is that the traditional debt providers like banks or traditional NBFCs, their lending model is typically oriented around either very small ticket unsecured loans, which do not meet the entire funding requirements of these kind of ambitious companies, or for the larger ticket loans, the evaluation methodology of banks and traditional NBFCs are oriented around mortgage collateral being available, 3-year profitability being there, and so on. But if you look at this new breed of entrepreneurs, professionals who are setting up these companies, by design, they're setting up asset light businesses. And because they are first generation entrepreneurs, typically they don't come with a lot of family assets or assets of their own that they can mortgage and get a loan against it. So essentially, the bank and NBFC funding is not available to them, not because they are bad, building bad businesses, but it's just because by design they are asset light, and essentially they are early stage companies trying to solve a fair bit of problems. So from that perspective, we are different from the banks and traditional NBFCs because we lend without taking mortgage collateral typically. We are also able to lend to companies while they are loss making, as long as they are backed by venture capital investors. Now that takes us to the other extreme. So the other source of capital for all these professional entrepreneurs is to raise venture capital, equity. The problem is, if you really look at the venture capital equity model, it is the model by design. It is impossible for them to reach out to all the professionally managed companies and be able to provide venture capital. And even if they provide venture capital, you know, at the end of the day, equity investing is about investing and taking a share in the business, which a lot of the professional entrepreneurs realize that, you know, of course you need equity, venture capital equity, if you're ambitious and you want to grow fast. But if you take too much venture capital equity, first of all, it's very difficult to get venture capital equity. But if you do manage to get it, taking too much of it actually leads to a significant dilution and ownership of the founder, which is not in the interest of the founder. So basically, you know, you're putting in all the efforts, and you realize that when by the time you want to reap harvest, you don't own much of the business. So I think in that kind of a situation, somebody like us actually is able to help, because we provide debt. We don't typically take a share in the business. We provide debt. Uh, we don't provide debt based on mortgage or 3-year profitability like a bank does. So in that sense, what we're able to do is kind of fill the gap between the bank and the venture capital equity providers, fill the gap between them to enable professionally managed companies to grow fast, without having to provide mortgage or without having to dilute their shareholding in the business. So I think that is how we are kind of different from both these segments. At the same time, I would say that it's not so much as a competition with these two segments. I think all of us play an important role. As far as we are concerned, we are trying to fill a critical gap that existed, and in some sense, all of us work together or need to work together to essentially promote a large number of entrepreneurial firms that are solving social or entrepreneurial problems. So that's about how we are different or same with the venture capital equity and bank financings. As far as products that we provide, as you can understand, one of the beyond the fact that we are able to lend without taking mortgage collateral and without taking a lot of dilute, share in the company and those kind of uh, fallback options. Uh, we also need to innovate on the product, in the sense that if you typically go to a bank as far as debt is concerned, or an NBFC, uh, everybody specializes on the NBFC front. Everybody specializes in a particular type of loans, uh, but what happens with a lot of the companies is that their funding requirement often varies. So for example, some companies may be seasonal. They may have seasonal businesses, and which means that for 3 to 6 months of the year they have business. For the rest of the year, there's very little business. Now, if I make a EMI or equal monthly installment loan to them, they are expected to pay down the loans when they don't have business. That doesn't make sense, because you're forcing the companies to, pay when they don't have cash flows. This is very typical in, say, food and agri companies where there is a seasonal cash flow. This is very typical in education-related sector companies where the cash flows happen only during the time when the fees are collected from the students, and things like that. So there is a need for flexibility. The other thing is that the medium to long-term plans of the company may require the flexibility to be able to pay as per the growth of the company. So what we do is we actually provide a variety, pretty much in the entire bouquet of debt products that people can get from banks or NBFCs. So right from plain vanilla term loans to revolving facilities to purchase order invoice financing to quasi lease financing kind of products, and sometimes even quasi equity products we provide. But if you broadly classify the products, I'll say there are two products that we offer, two classes of products. One is the uh, amortizing term loan, meaning you take the loan once and you pay it over the life of the loan of, say, anywhere between 12 to 36 months, sometimes even 5 years. You slowly pay down in installments. But what we do there is, if the company requires, we can customize the installments based on the requirement of the company. So instead of it being equal installments, it can be variable size of installments. But you you pay it down over a period of time. The other category, major category of product is the revolving facility, wherein which works like a typical cash credit limit in a bank, but basically what that helps in is that you get a limit from us and you draw down when you need the money, and as soon as you are paid back, you pay us back because you don't need the money any longer. This is typically helpful in business to business companies who serve business orders from other businesses, meaning that they will need the working capital from us only when working capital funding or loan from us only when they have an order to meet. Otherwise, they won't have a funding requirement. So why bear the interest cost when they don't need the funding? So they pay the money back to us. Typically, one lending entity offering both these types of products is not common. In theory, banks are supposed to provide this, but in practice, it doesn't really happen that way, especially with the point that I made about mortgage collateral not being available. It is very difficult for these small firms to be able to get access to the entire range of products which we are able to offer. So we have companies, for example, where we have done 4 loans, and the structure of all those 4 loans are different depending on the actual requirement. So that's where those are the products, Surya, that we typically offer to our clients. And like I said, it's a vast range of products depending on the requirement, but you can broadly classify it into these 2 categories that I just explained.
Okay. All right. So let's shift focus to the ESG part of the business. So, the portfolio companies that you manage today impact over 13 of the United Nations SDGs. Tell us more about how do you select positive impact business models and apply prudent ESG filters to onboard your customers?
Sure. So, see, the way we look at our target companies is that we take a sectoral approach. So we've actually chosen to operate in sectors which we know have a significantly high positive social or environmental impact. And from that, what we try to do is essentially focus on sectors that we know are going to result in the positive impact as far as society, social and environment is concerned. The second thing that happens is that within those sectors, we actually first have an exclusion list wherein we exclude a lot of the ESG related risks that may come into those businesses by virtue of their operating model. So in some sense, given our size and focus, and given our focus is on mostly the small and medium or early stage enterprises, we try to eliminate, the high ESG risk kind of opportunities. So we don't lend to them through our exclusion list. And that includes everything from heavily polluting industries to, for example, military equipments to types of businesses that can lead to, kind of displacement of people in significantly large numbers, and so on. So we actually exclude them. We don't work with them because our typical funding that we provide is significantly small. There are obviously large development financial institutions which are able to provide much larger amounts of funding that actually actively work with these kind of companies that are on the borderline of ESG risks and help them improve ESG over their lifetime. We don't do that. We actually exclude them because our focus is more on the small and early stage companies. So from a strategic perspective, what we've done is we look at the sector, then we look at the exclusion list, filter out for the companies that don't are high ESG risk. Then what we do is within the safer or the lower or medium ESG risk categories, we try to evaluate during our the credit process on different aspects of ESG. Governance is, of course, a key parameter because we fund only companies that are professionally managed in nature. So we typically stay away from uh, poor governance kind of companies, and we like, for example, independent directors being there, professional management, or formal processes of board meetings being held, and board inputs being taken, and those are part of the evaluation. But beyond that, what we do is from the ENS perspective, we look at how the business is affecting different aspects of both the environment and social aspects. So just to give you a few examples, we have a detailed questionnaire where we answer all these questions for all the companies that we consider. But just to give you an example, on the environmental side, we try to establish whether the company is going to lead to pollution or either water or air pollution of some sort. If yes, then what are the measures that they are taking to avoid or reduce that pollution within the acceptable limits? Is there formal programs that are in place for training of employees to make sure that they do not cause harm? We also look at various other aspects related to, for example, the human capital that works within those firms, to see whether the organizations have health and safety measures in place, whether they track the incidents of, for example, injuries, at the factory locations if they have factories, or whether social security is taken care of. We avoid. We've actually declined quite a few companies where we found that social security was not taken care of by the companies themselves. We look at aspects of whether the companies, while we don't have a lot of control on the entire supply chain, we encourage companies to ensure that there is no child labor in the entire supply chain. At least in their operations, there should not be child labor. So those kind of things we evaluate when we decide on making the loan, along with the credit evaluation, because our belief is that ESG and credit goes hand in hand. If you are looking at the long-term viability or success of companies, short-term, you can probably ignore the ESG and be okay. But the truth is, if you are really looking at long-term, it doesn't make sense. And given our origins or our existence as primarily an impact investor, we want to focus on the E, S, and G aspects, so that, I mean, G obviously is also a part of the credit related decision making anyways, but E and S is also critical because we are looking long term in anything that we are doing. But like I said, we have this limitation that we don't have the ability to engage with companies that are weaker on the ESG metrics and work with them and get them towards a, a positive ESG status over the life of the loan. We manage a portfolio of 100 companies today, active portfolio of 100 companies today. It's impossible to actually have that kind of conversations with so many people, because at the end of the day, we are a debt provider. We have little control over what the companies do, and our funding sizes are not as big. So what we do is we eliminate the risks upfront, and even after that, there are still some issues that need to be addressed. So when we do due diligence, we actually build awareness with the companies on those aspects and try to say that, if you improve these areas, this is how you will benefit. So basic things like get an employee handbook in place, that kind of a thing also helps companies quite a lot. So those kind of inputs come during, or we give during the due diligence phase. And in a lot of cases, we monitor those aspects after we make the loan. So the next time when we are making the loan, we ask, have you done this like you said you would do? So that is the kind of focus or evaluation that we have on the ESG aspects.
But tell me, what is your current exposure to clean energy projects?
So we don't fund projects directly. We fund companies. So over the last 4 years, I would say we funded close to 500 crores of clean and sustainability related projects. I mean, if clean energy related projects. Uh, Out of that, the current, I think the exposure as of March is close to about 50 crores from the total 500 crores that we would have disbursed. But these exposures are on companies who then go on and do projects. And typically, our projects are not large scale projects. These may be an off grid solar home system for a small 2 room home, or could be a rooftop solar for a school or a hospital in a tier 3 location. So the projects are not very big. Each company that we fund actually end up building several hundreds of projects. I don't have a number of the projects, but we funded about in total close to about 20-25 companies with that would fit into what you call clean energy or energy efficiency or climate sustainability as such.
All right.
In fact, if you include things like sustainability from climate sustainability from a organic supply chain and those kind of perspectives, the number is much larger. I think we would have funded close to about 35-40 companies of that sort, and of course the funding volumes also will be significantly higher.
Okay. And where do you really see India standing in terms of responsible and impact investing, and what potential do you really see in this space?
So I think as a general awareness, we are way behind, say, Northern Europe or the developed countries. So I think there's a lot to be done. Of course, there is a lot of talk about sustainability and clean energy in the recent times, but we'll have to see how policy and how that really encourages this. And it's also about awareness of each of us as individuals to be ready to accept or be have a preferential behavior towards products and services that actually result from a ESG conscious production system. I think as general public, our awareness is low, and I think for a very long time, India was essentially just trying to get access to the products and services. I think we are not there in terms of, so there was scarcity. But slowly what is happening is that scarcity is, we have a very large middle class now where scarcity is not so much of an issue any longer. I wouldn't say that it's gone, but I wouldn't say that I would say that it's not so much of an issue. If that middle class slowly starts realizing that there is a need to focus on these aspects for the benefit of their children, I think we will make a lot of improvement and leaps and bounds. And given the size of our country, if even half the Indians think about it in a, are more conscious about it, we will make a massive change. So I think from that perspective, we are not where we should be, but awareness is building in the recent times. I think the only caution that I would have is it should not be like a fad. So I say that I'm running a electric vehicle. That's great for the environment. Well, I'm not so sure, because if your electricity is coming from coal-fired thermal plants, it's not really climate positive. So that depth of engagement has to be there. So, or I'm using what do you call sustainable products, but when you really look at the product supply chain, you realize that there's possibly someone who's not getting a fair price. There's possibly someone who is employing child labor. are we really looking at ensuring that all of those things don't happen? I mean, of course, there are practical issues around it, but I think we are not there yet as a country. Like the way, for example, the North European countries or places like Netherlands and all have done. We're not there. So that's what it is.
Yeah, I think getting the E, S, and G aligned together is itself a big task ahead for us. Yeah. Let's move to probably on the climate change side. The risk of climate change is one of the central issues facing the world, and there's widespread consensus that climate change can dramatically alter ecosystems, and in fact, and that requires a lot of attention and action. How do you think that the private sector can drive action to support the transition from, say, conventional brown sectors to green areas?
I think majority of the job has to be done by the private sector. I mean, if you look at the most of the countries today, especially in place like India, most of the uh, value addition activity is done by the private sector. And when I say value addition, I'm talking about both probably products and services. Uh, and since the value addition activities are typically done by private sector, there is obviously the private sector that has to play this role. I think there is a need to encourage that because, like I was saying, there are uh, India is coming out of that phase where scarcity was the theme, and now slowly we are getting to a stage where scarcity is no longer the problem. It's about better management that is more necessary. From that perspective, I think there needs to be encouragement, which I think is, and the encouragement can come in two ways. One is policy encouragement from a taxation perspective, which is I think is difficult to achieve anyways. But the other source is capital. If you can get access to better priced capital because you are better on the ESG metrics, I think it is going to be acting as as an incentive for a lot of these companies to transition. It's easier said than done because how do you really evaluate ESG is a problem. Uh, I think the core problem of this of our the ESG industry, if I may say, is that this issue of not being able to ascertain the exact ESG status, which is also because of the variety in business models and things like that. It's always been very difficult to, summarize it and talk about it like a financial metric. So I think unless there is a push towards better ESG from a policy perspective, like for example, creating a different category of companies altogether that are committing to ESG, or for example, unlocking sources of capital which are focused on ESG type businesses, I mean ESG positive businesses. I think it's going to be difficult for all of us to transition because, like I was saying, I think that though reality is that each of the business owners should be concerned about the next generation and the kind of world that they will live in, it the commercial short term incentives actually are too much uh, you know on the other side of the balance, which make it difficult for people to take up. I mean, it leads a lot of uh, I'll say belief and effort to get ESG positive today. But if, for example, there is a policy push and also a capital market encouragement, uh, basically the large capital providers, if they honestly push money towards ESG positive businesses, I think the transition will be easier and faster. But again, having said that, it's easier said than done, for sure.
That's for sure. Moving on to the last question, Abhishek. The world is going through some really challenging times, and India in particular is going through this entire upheaval with the health crisis and with the second wave gripping India. What are your key learnings over the last 1 year? And do you think this pandemic will be a tipping point for investments in the ESG and sustainability space?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's really painful that all of us situation that all of us are going through. It should be the tipping point, um, but I guess as of now, we are all of us are just too bother about what's going on with our lives or our lives of our close relatives or friends. I think events like these point out to the fact that if we really don't care about the environment and we don't have the uh, the infrastructure that can serve the needs of society across the different social strata, we are going to be in a mess. So I think that realization should have come by now. But at the same time, I don't really know if that realization was not there. I guess it was always there. We always knew that India as a country was always underinvested in healthcare, for example, or even education for that matter. Uh, but we are paying the price for that today. The truth is that we can't expect the government to do make all the investments. So there will probably, for a large country like India, there will probably be a lot of private involvement. But this issue of private overpowering welfare is something that needs to be avoided. The government has to make things work for the entire society. It can't do it on its own because we don't have, as a nation, we don't. I mean, there's not enough money to do that probably. But if you encourage the private participation and all of that, it has to be done, as per the rules that benefit the society at large, not the rules that benefit a small segment. So I hope that those kind of changes will occur. I think for the world overall, this uh, COVID would have been a lesson that the large capital owners or capital providers should be conscious of these kind of impacts on, because everybody's business has been impacted. No matter how commercially minded you are, you realize that if something of this sort happens again, it is ultimately your commercial returns that are going to get affected. So unless you really make an attempt to make sure that these kind of events don't occur in future, which is, in other words, to say that unless you are conscious of the ENS aspects, you will end up harming your own business that is from which you're expecting commercial returns. So in other words, the capital providers should also, I mean, now they have proof that uh, if you don't pay attention to ENS aspects, commercial returns anyways don't happen. So given those two aspects, I think both from the government side and the private capital providers side, I think there will be an increased focus on allocating capital for ENS positive or ENS conscious businesses. Uh, I I think and I hope, actually it's more of hope than think as of now, because to some extent I believe that we all knew it, but somehow we never acted upon it. So I think that tipping point, the COVID would serve as a tipping point for that to happen. However, once again, one word of caution is that we need to be sure that it's not lip service. The whole thing about saying that I'm doing all these things, taking nice photographs, making your annual reports with that, but not really creating an impact is a real danger that is there. So we have to be honest about it as well over a period of time. Uh, and that again is easier said than done, because everybody is interested in short-term benefits. Very few people are looking at the long term. So how do we make people start looking at the long term is probably going to be enabled by policy and the big capital owners over a period of time. So yeah, so that's what I think, or I hope will happen.
I hope we have those policy actions being taken soon, and the companies also taking their onus and working towards it. Thank you, Abhishek, so much for taking your time out for this discussion today. All the best to you and the entire team at Caspian for your efforts, and stay safe and healthy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Surya. Thank you so much for the opportunity once again. It was a pleasure talking to you, and please do take care and stay safe. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.